chess is something like I've always known how to do. So I learned when I was 4 years old, and I don't even remember learning. Apparently I've been told afterwards I saw my dad and my uncle play a game of chess, and they were just normal amateur players. And apparently I saw them playing, and I asked to play, and they thought, well, we'll just humour me and just teach me the rules. And then a couple of weeks later, I was beating both of them, and then my dad thought, well, maybe we should take him to a chess club, and they just sort of went from there really. So and then from all my youth, I was always captain of my age group for the national team, and usually playing with much older kids. And so I've sort of had the chess part of me as being a big core part of my upbringing and who I am. I think chess, actually a number of things that I learnt when I was young, it wasn't so much the chess itself, it was the skills that you were training while you were playing chess. So problem solving, imagination, creative thinking, strategic thinking, all of these things. If you play chess to a higher level, what you're really honing is those meta skills. And I realized from quite young that it's one of the things I liked chess was this was a great practice arena to get good, sort of like a mental gym, if you like, to get really good at those other skills, which you could then translate to all sorts of other subjects like science or business. I had a bit of an epiphany around that age because I was playing, I was more or less a professional chess player. So I was going to school, but I was taking weeks off school to go around the world playing chess, and all my summer holidays and Christmas holidays and so on. So it was pretty full on. And I was, the rest of the time I was studying chess. And I remember thinking that to become world champion, which was my plan at that point, then your whole life would have to be dedicated to nothing but chess, and learning opening moves and theory and all this kind of stuff. And I started realizing the more I was specializing in chess, the less it was about these meta skills that would be useful for other things, but the more specific that knowledge would be to just chess. So it wouldn't be useful for other things you might want to do. And I kind of had this thought when I was in a big tournament actually in Liechtenstein, near Switzerland. I remember playing a big match. It was like 10-hour match against, I think it was the Danish champion at the time, the adult champion. And I lost the match after 10, 12 hours. I remember thinking, was that really a good use of all that brain power? And I went for a long walk in some beautiful field, or at least I remember that in my mind, in the mountains. And I remember thinking, maybe this isn't, there's this whole room full of amazingly bright people, and they're using their minds to, basically compete each other and try and win. And what was the, maybe they should all be using their minds to solve, cancer or something. And I was just sort of thinking, maybe we could harness, all of these bright minds, maybe there's a better use of that time and energy that would be better for the world. And so I made this decision actually at that moment that I would move away from chess and start exploring other areas and passions of mine, and use those meta skills as my foundations for getting into these other things. But I just felt, although I love chess and I still love chess now, I felt it was too narrow a thing to dedicate your entire life to. So I dedicate my life to, it's artificial intelligence is obviously what we do at DeepMind. But really the underlying reason I work on artificial intelligence is I want to understand how the universe works. And I want to, it's the deepest scientific question. I want to try and answer the most deep questions that we have. What is consciousness? What are we doing here? What's the universe about? When I was a kid, my favorite subject was physics. And usually if you're interested in the big questions about the universe, you would become a physicist. That's the normal route for that. And it was it's my favorite subject all the way up to university. And but then I read this book called Dreams of a Final Theory by Steven Weinberg, who's a Nobel Prize winner. And I must have been in my late teens. And this is all about physicists struggling to find a final theory of everything, like how everything works. And that's what string theory is about, and so on. And I realized that they actually hadn't got that far yet, and some of the things they were tackling were incredibly difficult, and no one seemed to be making progress. So it felt to me like maybe what was needed was more intelligence, and maybe something like AI as a sort of smart tool to help scientists could be something that would allow us to make those kinds of breakthroughs and find the kind of theories that we were after. So it felt to me like working on AI would be more fruitful, and then using that as a tool to help solve things in physics and other sciences. The thing I'm most excited about is I think we're on the cusp now of a new era in scientific discovery where we'll be able to use AI and machine learning to help us in areas of science and medicine to make sense of enormous amounts of data that we're generating from our experiments, and find new insights and new structure in that vast amount of data. And I think that will lead to new scientific theories and new scientific breakthroughs. The obvious thing that's already happening today is to do with radiography. So the low-hanging fruit in some sense is making sense of imaging data, whether that's a PET scan of cancerous tissue, or what we've worked directly on, which is retina scans and detecting macular degeneration very, very early on. And there aren't enough radiographers, and often the diagnosis from these scans is one of the bottlenecks you get in treatment. And in a lot of these cases, delayed treatment can be very critical to the outcome. So we're already collaborating with many hospitals in the UK about adding in machine learning and AI tools to help with those pattern recognitions, if you like, those assessments about what's happening in those scans. So I think that's going to result in much more efficient diagnosis and much more efficient treatment. So I think that's just the beginning. And then the next steps will be things like drug discovery, where you've got some target, some virus or some bacteria, and you need to generate some new compound that will target that. And I think again there, we're on the cusp of being able to use things like machine learning to discover new types of drugs. What happens is if you think about it's a massive combinatorial problem, right? You've got lots and lots of possibilities. So, you've got all these molecules that you could put together to create a new compound, which would create a new drug. And then you've got this complex new, virus that you've just discovered, and you need to build a compound that will attach to it, right? And so, really, the problem is that we know quite a lot about physics, we know a lot about chemistry, we know a lot about biology, but the combinations of possibilities is huge, right? It's astronomical, the number of compounds you can combine together, and you would need to test that each one laboriously. Maybe you'd have some theories about things that could work, but you wouldn't know for sure, right, as a scientist. And what the kinds of systems we're building, like AlphaGo and AlphaZero, our new systems, is you can think of them as optimization programs. You give them some goal to optimize, whether that's efficacy with a drug or winning a game, and they figure out for themselves the right search path through this massive combinatorial space. So it's just sort of, and they do that by be able to experience many, look at much more data than any human could comprehend, and do that far more quickly. So they can find, these systems can find patterns that are there in the data that we, as human scientists or human experts or human medical practitioners, wouldn't have the bandwidth to do. So I'm going to dedicate myself to this point where I'm very excited now, where we've got the AI, to a point where it's maybe just about getting mature enough that we can apply it to some really interesting, challenging questions in science. And we're starting to tackle that. We started with a project on protein folding, trying to figure out how protein, the 3D structure of proteins, and if we can do that, that would be really useful for things like drug discovery. And so I think we're starting to get to the cusp now where we can use AI for a number of really interesting scientific problems. So I'm really looking forward to the next 10 years applying that. Biologists would love to know, if you give them an amino acid sequence, they would love to know what the 3D structure of that ends up folding into, because the 3D structure governs the protein's functionality. And so the problem is there's no known theory or mapping from the 2D string of amino acid sequence to the 3D structure. So what we'd like to do is build a way of predicting the 3D structure just from the 2D amino acid sequence. And the way they do it at the moment is very laborious. You have to crystallize the protein, and then you can investigate its 3D structure, but it takes years for each protein. And there's millions of proteins, so we need to somehow speed that up. So the goal is to figure out how proteins fold, and obviously in Alzheimer's Alzheimer's, one of the hypotheses is that the amyloid beta protein is misfolding and not folding in the correct way, and they don't know why. Something's triggering that. So I imagine it could be helpful for that down the line. I mean, it wouldn't directly solve Alzheimer's, but it would be something you could use as a tool to help you speed up maybe trials for drugs for Alzheimer's. But that would be for Alzheimer's researchers to figure out. But we're trying to build this sort of generic platform that many different biologists could use. So I mean, we talked a lot about medicine, but I'm very interested in helping astronomers look at, discover what. I mean, some people already use machine learning to discover new planets from data they have from their telescopes, and find even smaller planets, exoplanets that they couldn't see, or figure out from their own using their own maths. I'm interested in, I've given a talk at CERN, and they now use machine learning to, try and detect new particles. There's so many areas of science where, I mean, science today is all about creating huge amounts of data from the experiments and then trying to make sense of that data. And that's what AI does. AI, in a kind of most abstract sense, converts, masses of data into actionable knowledge, right? So that's got to be useful for all sorts of areas of science. I've probably had quite a lot of aha moments. I mean, I guess one of the really formative ones was when I first got my first computer. I was about 8 years old. It was a ZX Spectrum, and I remember starting to learn to program on it and sort of learning from books. And I programmed some. One of my first programs I can remember was a program to play this game called Reversi or Othello. It's called Othello in the UK, but it's called Reversi, I think, in the US. And it played it reasonably well, and it could beat my kid brother. And I remember thinking, this is amazing that you can create a program that you can go to sleep afterwards and it can carry on number crunching, and then you can wake up the next day and it will solve something for you that you hadn't you wanted to know the answer to when you went to sleep. So it seemed, from, again, I guess I was even then obsessed with efficiency, is that seems incredible, like a way to enhance your mind, right? So suddenly you can outsource problems to this computer and it can solve certain types of things for you. To me, that just seemed like magic and a magical extension of the mind. And from then I was sort of hooked on computers and programming, and then ultimately AI. Well, my parents, I always described them as being a bit bohemian. So, I didn't really realize that at the time when I was growing up. I just thought everybody was like this. But they didn't really have proper set jobs, especially my father. He was, he never really had a 9 to 5 job, but he was always doing different things. He ran a toy store at one point. He was a singer-songwriter when he was younger. His favorite was Bob Dylan, so he wanted to sort of go into singing and songwriting. Still does that now, actually, and then eventually he became a teacher. But he did a whole host of different things, and he was very entrepreneurial. He always used to have, the toy store was his own company. Even teaching now as evening classes is his own, small little company as well. So he was always doing his own things, and I think he and my mum instilled in us that you could take whatever path you wanted in life and just follow your passions. And just in terms of financial, I mean, we were a pretty poor family, but my father always used to make enough money, I think, often by buying and selling houses. So we moved. I must have moved like 10 times before I was around 12 years old. So we used to move house sort of every year, downsizing, upsizing, and just depending on the housing market. And that I think he made a bit of money from that, and that was enough to keep us going. I just thought that was normal. So, and I think maybe for me that made me, and I changed school lots of times, and I think for a lot of kids that would have been, I realize now that would have been a lot unsettling, but I think for me it just got me very used to settling in with new groups of people, making new friends, and getting on with things. And so I think that actually stood me in good stead in terms of running companies and things like that, where you have to interact with a lot of people. I think that probably it's come from that, being comfortable with lots of different environments. I'm pretty obsessive about being efficient because I think time is so short and life is so short, and there's so many interesting and amazing things to do and experience. So I don't sleep very much. I've always been a nocturnal person, so I normally sleep at sort of 3 or 4 in the morning, and I only have about 5 or 6 hours sleep, which is probably not enough actually, but as brain studies tell us. But there's just so many things I need to pack into the day. So the way I normally split it is that my during the daytime I do I manage the company and have meetings and do administrative things and organizational things. And then when I get home, I start a sort of second day of work after dinner around about 10 p.m. where I start thinking about all my creative things. So that's when I would read books or research papers or write research papers or come up with ideas about algorithms. I would do that in the small hours of the morning, and I've always found myself my best creatively in the small hours of the morning when everything's quiet. I mean, obviously, it depends on the on the mood and what I've got to do that day. But I generally think a lot about big questions in the later night. It's kind of conducive to that, and how best to bring about these technologies, what's missing from computers today, and then I dream about how we could deploy these things for the good of the world and solve things like science and which ordering of challenges should be tackled first. We're looking at a whole bunch of areas. We're looking at quantum chemistry. We're looking at theorem proving in mathematics. We're looking at some areas of physics to do with quantum computing. So there's a lot of quite a wide range of areas that we are in the preliminary steps. One reason I think I've been successful in creating an unusual company like DeepMind, is that my passion, I've been lucky in life and I've been able to follow many passions that I've had. Initially it was games, then it was, programming, then it's AI and neuroscience. And I think I've managed to build a world that I'm in, or a career that utilizes all of those interests, and I can sort of indulge in all those passions as part of my job. But the extra one that I have a passion for, which is sort of tangential to those things, is organizational design. And I don't know why that is, because it's quite different. It's probably connected to my obsession with efficiency, where companies are really, obviously they're made of groups of individuals, and so how you organize them and what kind of culture you have will determine how much output that organization can produce. And I think in my career I've been lucky to have worked with many brilliant people, and of course including at DeepMind. And I've learned, I think, how to try and get the best out of those people and what sort of cultures that requires. And I think that's led to DeepMind having quite a unique culture. And I think that's just as big a effect on the output we have as our research ideas. The goal is to make as fast progress as possible towards building human level AI. And then the idea is that as we build these technologies, we'll be able to apply them usefully for the benefit of the world in all sorts of sectors like healthcare and science. So I think in a way, you can think of AI as a kind of meta solution to all of the other problems that we would like to have solutions to as a society. Obviously, we work on AI, and I spent my whole career on it because I think it's going to be one of the most amazing, empowering technologies for humanity ever invented. I think I think of it as a smart tool that will unleash the true potential of human ingenuity by sort of working, whilst being able to draw on these kinds of smart tools to help us, as I mentioned, in science and medicine. But there's going to be a lot of disruption too, like with any new powerful technology, and AI might be one of the most disruptive of all. And we've always been cognizant of that at the big, from the start of DeepMind and even before. And we've always thought about ethics and responsibility of stewarding that kind of powerful technology into the world as being a really huge responsibility that we have as one of the leading exponents of this technology. And we've been at the forefront of leading the debate on that with things. We brought together Partnership on AI, which is a big consortium of all the biggest companies coming together to think about the best way to deploy this kind of technology. And we've always been thinking about the ethics of this from the beginning. So, we believe that stewarded correctly, this technology should be for the benefit of everyone. And I think we're going to see some amazing breakthroughs that I think, frankly, society needs, from climate change to Alzheimer's. Where we're not making enough progress as a society on these kind of very, very pressing problems. And I think if we could do science better and we had more intellectual horsepower behind it, we could make better, faster solutions. You could invent some new, much more efficient renewable energy. You could maybe solve fusion. You could try and create a new material that would capture carbon cheaply out of the atmosphere. The sky's the limit, really, in terms of if you have that kind of optimization technique in a box that you can call upon and have it present you with alternatives. You could give it a goal function, as long as you could specify a goal clearly to it, some metric, which I think you probably could with something like climate. I think that you could, really make progress with, new materials or new solutions to those problems. Another way that it could help with climate is you could do better modeling of the climate, so predictions could be more accurate about what's happening. You could analyze satellite imagery in real time so that you could see if icebergs were breaking up, and you could see if deforestation was happening where it was, where it wasn't supposed to be happening. I think NGOs, we've talked to a lot of NGOs about this. There might be, international agreements, but how do you actually track that on the ground when there's such vast amounts of space going on? So I think there's multiple ways, actually, on a number of levels that the AI could help with something like climate. We pay doctors a lot more than nurses, and as a society. And in the future, in 10, 20 years' time, I could imagine that a doctor that doesn't have some kind of AI database that they're using to keep them up to speed with the latest developments, would be about not a doctor you'd want to see. And so diagnosis, I think, I could imagine, is fairly logical. It could be enhanced by AI. But on the other hand, if you're ill in hospital and you want to be looked after, I think a nurse and a human touch would be a lot better than having a robot. So I feel like those kinds of jobs, like teaching and other things that maybe society undervalues currently, will become more valued. So I can imagine one day, maybe nurses will be paid more than doctors, and maybe that's a good thing. Right. And at the moment we revalue certain things in society, and maybe those things will become less rare, and other things will become more rare and more unique. What is the brain? Is it just the physical biology, or is there something more? And from neuroscience, it looks to all the neuroscience discovery so far, it looks like that you can describe the brain in mechanistic terms. And if that's true, then most of the functions that the brain has, you should be able to mimic in some way with a computer. Right? And this is what Alan Turing was studying, who's one of my all-time heroes. And he came up with this idea of a Turing machine, which is a machine that can mimic any other machine. And we know the human brain is a type of Turing machine. That's how Turing was able to come up with that idea. It remains to be seen whether AIs can do all of those different capabilities. We're doing jobs we love, but there's many people in the world who are doing jobs because they have to, because they need to earn enough money to pay for their families and so on. And actually, one question I would always ask is that if you were to win the lottery tomorrow, how many people would actually go back to their jobs? And I'm sure that's been done by Harvard. I'm sure that study's been done by Harvard Business School or something. But I suspect it's a very small fraction, like less than 5%, maybe less than 1% of the world would do that. So that shows to me that a lot of people are spending many, many hours doing things they're not passionate about and not interested in, and possibly quite mundane. And so maybe it would be good if we can relieve people from that drudgery, and yet still make sure that they share in the productivity gains and the prosperity that new productivity will create. This has happened before many times. I mean, the Industrial Revolution did that. So we don't, spin wheels in weaving houses anymore. They went on to be, I guess, designers and fashion designers or something, right? So there's always been, this is nothing new. There's always been an evolution when new technologies come in. So that makes some jobs more efficient. So there's some disruption, and then it opens up new jobs that we can't even imagine today. I think it's going to be the same. I'm sure there will be some sort of device that allows you to get it on a rudimentary level, but I think it still won't, like with currently, to learn languages. If you really want to understand the nuances of a great novel, you need to read it in the original to get all of the finer details and nuances of what the writer was getting at. So I suspect that will be true still for a long while. But if just basic functional level translation, yeah, sure. I think we're almost there already with the translation systems that we have. Of course, they don't really understand language at all. So they're just doing statistical sort of correlations between the two languages. So it's funny, they can do translation, but they don't understand language. So they can't create language. They can just do this sort of mapping from one language to the other. I think we'll have machines that can write things that are coherent English, but would they be a great novel? I doubt it, because I was having this debate actually with somebody, a famous writer, and we were talking about this exact topic. And my view is that a great novel is also partly because the person who's written it was human, and they went through some things, and you can connect to the human condition that they're describing. And I think that's important for a novel to be great. I don't think it's just the technical grammatical components of the novel. I think it's also the fact that it was written by another human that you can empathize with. I mean, that's the reason why I think we bother to say for some stories this is based on a true story. Why would we say that unless for some reason that makes us, it makes it more emotive that we know somebody else has gone through that, actually gone through that in real life. And I think there's an element of that. I don't know if it would be as meaningful if you knew that it was written by a machine. It's like any powerful technology. The technology is neutral in of itself. It depends on how humans are going to use it. We can use, all of the history of science has been like that, from nuclear to biology. There are many good and bad ways to use these technologies, and we just have to make sure that we build AI in a safe way, in a controllable way, and I see that as like a tool. And then the second question is making sure you deploy it for the good of the world rather than the bad. I'm against using any of this kind of technology for any kind of military, so that's not something I'm going to get involved with, or we will do at DeepMind. I can't speak for what other organizations will do. My view is that, and we've signed open letters and UN letters to this effect, that there should always be humans in the loop for any kind of warfare or weapon system. I think that on the research front, the researchers know each other pretty well, and go to the same conferences, and there's a spirit of sharing information. So, for example, we publish all of our work in big journals like Nature and Science. And so I don't think there's a sort of classical arms race. I mean, there's definitely a competition in terms of being the best commercially and trying to get the biggest benefit out of these technologies. But I wouldn't say it's a classical arms race, no. I think there needs to be a better understanding, probably in government, of what AI is, and we certainly help talk to various people that we know in the UK to try and educate them about what these technologies are, because, as you said, they are quite hard to understand. So, I think it's definitely something that needs to be debated. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we are at the forefront of having these ethical debates and bringing that into light about how do we want to use these systems and deploy these systems. For example, not use them for war. I think humans occupy actually a very special place in the universe. As far as we know, we haven't discovered any alien life. So we're the only sort of fully conscious beings in the universe, and I think that's very key. I mean, we have to figure out what consciousness is, but I think it was Carl Sagan that said, we're like waking up the universe, right? So the universe is kind of it's huge, but it hasn't have any self-awareness unless, but that's what we bring to the universe. So I think humans have an extraordinary kind of unique part in the universe from that perspective. I'm open-minded about these things, and if you can, what you know as a scientist actually is that if you're a proper scientist, of course, the scientific method is one of the greatest inventions mankind has ever had, that we've ever had as humanity, and it works brilliantly, the scientific method, and that's what has allowed us to have the Enlightenment and modern civilization. But I think as a scientist, what you realize is the more you find out, actually, the bigger questions there are unresolved. You sort of go deeper, and then there's more things you don't know. And in physics, for example, we don't know what dark matter is and dark energy now, right? And there's theories about it, but we don't really know. And I think there's always more questions. There's the Big Bang. So we think that's how the universe started, but what was before the Big Bang? So I'm quite open-minded to the fact that there may be many aspects of the physical universe that we just don't understand, and that when we have maybe something like AI helping us, we'll better get a truer understanding of what's going on here, and then we'll be able to answer the questions about how this, what the purpose of the universe was, and was it designed, and how did it come about, much better. If you can't specify the objective that you're after very clearly, then it's difficult for these optimization systems to make progress towards it. Also, they need a lot of data or simulation to get enough simulated data to learn from. So they still, at the moment, the systems aren't that efficient in the amount of data they use. They still need vast amounts of data. And in a lot of subject areas, you just don't have that much data. Identifying the goal is one of the very key things, certainly the way we build our AI systems, which is called reinforcement learning, where they learn incrementally to progress towards their goal. So, examples in games where they learn to, their goal is to win the game, and they figure out what are the different ways that are helpful towards winning the game. But they figure that part out for themselves. And so specifying the goal is incredibly important. Having a metric to tell you how close you are to the goal, so you know that you're heading in the right direction, is important. And having simulation or a lot of ground truth data that you can learn from. So those are kind of the three components. I like actually everything from classical to, drum and bass. It just depends on what I'm trying to do. So if I'm programming, it will be something more like, something with a beat and just more energetic. Whereas if I'm thinking or reading, maybe it'll be classical, something more like, Vivaldi or Mozart, or something to get you in the right mood. So it's very to do with getting you into the right kind of zone. And I've learned a lot about myself. This is something I'd recommend young people to do, is learn about how they work best is one of the most important things, and what triggers you into certain creative states, and then maximize that. And the other thing I use is I really like film. So, that's one of the main things I do to relax, is I love watching great films, and I find them very inspirational. And then once I've watched a great film, I can usually re-trigger that mood or that emotion just by watching a small clip on YouTube of that film. And I can pretty much evoke the whole of that emotional state, reconstruct that for whatever it is I'm doing at that moment. I think it's called liquid drum and bass, actually, is the actual subgenre of drum and bass. So it's got a beat, but it's got melody as well. But it has to be interesting. If I have to focus, it can't have words, because then your brain starts listening into the words. So I don't have any lyrics. I can't listen to anything that has lyrics in it. It has to be just instrumental. And then I think probably what's happening on a neuroscience level, I think there's been some studies about this, is it gets you into a kind of alpha state, because this type of modern music is quite repetitive. So once you've heard it a few times, it's almost in the background, and I think it's just getting your brain into some kind of rhythm, which is, I find, better for focusing. We have a DeepMind band. They're very good. I mean, what's the thing we have here is we have a lot of people who are who have hidden talents in many domains. So they're all like brilliant scientists and engineers, but often in growing up, they'll have hidden talents. Like they'll be concert pianists on the side, or songwriters songwriters on the side. And we have actually a very talented house band that gets together and plays at all of our Christmas parties and other things. So that I think they use the music room mostly. The most influential on me was probably Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner. That's obviously was very influential for obvious reasons, because it's to do with sort of artificial intelligence and the nature of being human. But I have many. It depends on again the mood I'm in, what film I would go to. They're just machines, right? Like cars, and planes. They let us extend the human capability, but the human at the heart of it still has to be educated and soulful, and is still providing the kind of emotional impetus to these tools. These tools would be nothing without humans. You look at the internet and mobile, how fast things have changed. And just going back to the jobs questions, there are jobs exist today that you couldn't have imagined 20 years ago. Being a YouTube content creator, or some certain types of games designers, other things like that. There's all these kind of whole new classes of jobs that have come up, and I think that will happen again, enabled by all the new technologies, of which AI is one. So I don't. So what I would recommend to students today is that they, rather than focus on for kind of jobs for life, like I'm going to be, an accountant, and that's going to be 50 years and I'm done, so I'll just train in that. I think it'd be better to learn general skills that you could then adapt to any new type of sector that you've got to learn about. So that's things like learning to learn. So what I would encourage schools to teach is not specifically so much the rote learning or the specific subject you're learning, but actually the ability to learn, if that makes sense. So how do you learn best? What makes you learn best? How can you accelerate your own learning, no matter what subject you're learning? So it's subject independent, but it's just the ability to learn, and that's something that isn't really taught at schools. Are these metacognitive skills that would be useful no matter which way the world goes? Because I think the world's becoming unpredictable, and we don't know what new technology is going to come out, and things are changing very fast. So I think in that type of environment, you want to be as adaptable as possible. I think they should learn how to get the best for themselves and what they're passionate about. And I think they should learn skills that are transferable, so metacognitive skills that will stand them in good stead no matter which way technology goes or which way the world goes. They can find the most valuable things that make the most impact and make a difference in those areas if they have that kind of generalized training rather than subject-specific training, which has been the sort of history of schooling in the last century or so. And I would say it's a really exciting moment in human history. Like we're standing on the cusp of some really amazing things happening where, I think if it goes well, life will be way, way better for the vast majority of the world. Well, I think the first thing is you got to know yourself really well. That's what I did when I was a kid. Is like, how do you learn best? What motivates you? What are you passionate about? What hours of the day do you work best on? These are all the things that you're never really taught at school, and actually are the most important things. Is how to get the best out of yourself. And then I would say once you've mastered that, then you should think about the building on your strengths and passions to create a unique combination of skills that makes you unique compared to everyone else, and develop those strongly. So I think that's what I'd recommend. And I think a lot of the big breakthroughs and new companies that are going to be created in the future are where interdisciplinary ones, where you make connections between two disparate subjects, and you're the only one who can really see the connection between those two subjects. And I think that's going to happen again and again in the next sort of 10, 20 years. I think that's going to be where a lot of the big breakthroughs come from. So what motivates me is trying to be the best I can, and do justice to the sort of the kind of upbringing I had and the talents I had when I was young, and see to make the best use of that. But really, the thing that I'm most passionate about is understanding the world. So I would like to understand the big questions, like what's consciousness, what's going on in our brains, and what's going on out in the universe. So that's why I'm interested in physics and neuroscience, and I hope to use AI to help advance both those two fields.